a fist. Pretend that you don't care. You are a love warrior. Oh, 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 love warrior. Whoa, oh, 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 love warrior. Oh, 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 love warrior. Yeah, we're all getting ready for the World Environment Day. That's right, that's right. We're gonna have discussions, gonna have meaningful conversations, gonna bring people together from all over Europe to talk, speak, discuss, and play. Yeah. Love warrior. Oh, 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 oh. Love warrior. Love warrior. Oh, 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 oh. Love warrior. Hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, oh. Hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, oh. Hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, oh. Hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, oh. Son of day past, the child of night. I was born into the dark, conceived in endless light. I am a ripple on a tranquil lake, a patch of icy calm in cataclysmic wave. Love warrior, a hippie in disguise, of unassuming form, of undistinguished size. You are a love warrior, 5 fingers in the air, clenched into a fist. Pretend that you don't care. You are a love warrior. Oh, 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 love warrior. Whoa, oh, 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 love warrior. Whoa, oh, 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 love warrior. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh, 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 oh. World Environment Day discussion provided to you by Game On and the European Union. We will be online soon, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're all ready for this and you're looking forward to communing with your fellow activist, academic, hippie brothers and sisters to discuss the future of our beautiful planet. That's right. In 2 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. Love warrior, a hippie in disguise, of unassuming form, of undistinguished size. You are a love warrior, 5 fingers in the air, clenched into a fist. Pretend that you don't care. You are a love warrior. Oh, 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 love warrior. Whoa, oh, 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 love warrior. Whoa, oh, 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 love warrior. Whoa, oh, 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 oh.
Yay, this was so nice.
Well, good morning, everyone. We are really happy that you can accompany us today for this panel discussion on the launch of the Game On project. So to set up the climate game rules. First of all, it is a special day to do this. It is the World Environment Day, and the theme of this year is Time for Nature. Indeed, it is time for nature, and just in case, nature conservation also happens to be one of the core areas of the Game On project. But back to today's event, we would like to welcome all of our panelists, as well as all the attendants who became interested in this online discussion. Also, welcome to the project partnership who made it possible. Thanks to all for being here. So why are we here? The Game On project. You might have had already a preliminary glimpse at it. We started circulating a couple of videos that have been floating around Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. Influencers and artists from several countries helped us create them. Thanks a lot for that, because they helped us foreshadow the Game On project. So we are here for it, Game On. And what is the Game On project exactly? It is the initiative of a consortium of 10 partners to activate the European and global youth to react to the existential climate change, to the existential threat climate change represents for the future of all of us. We have tried to really represent a wide territory in order to activate these youth. The 10 project partners come from 8 Central and Eastern European countries. Obviously, the project wouldn't have been possible without the help of the EU mechanism, the Development, Education and Awareness Raising Funding Scheme. The Game On partnership firmly believes in the energized, strong will of younger generations. For what purpose exactly? To achieve the urgent systemic changes that are needed to overcome all the challenges brought by climate change. So the project is focused on activating this young energy all across the region and the globe. So now the question comes, how we will do it? Gaming, or better said, through a gamification approach. Game On will bring to the table several products and activities. To name just a few of them, geocaching challenges, board games, wilderness camps, museum exhibitions, theater plays, a mobile app, the etc. is long. And what will all these products and activities aim to do? They will mainly tackle 3 core areas that are strongly related to climate change: biodiversity conservation, adaptation and mitigation, and climate justice. And the products will tackle these 3 core areas with the aim of raising awareness on the problems of and the solutions to climate change. A further goal, obviously, is to push for a massive mobilization of people, young and hopefully also a little bit older, let's say, to demand for and make happen the changes we need. This is the climate change, the climate game for our survival. We have to accept the challenge and we must overcome it. So welcome everyone to the Game On project. And we pass to Kitty.
Thank you so much. If Dorka is ready to share her screen, we are going to watch the video that Thor just mentioned, which some of you already participated in, right? Yeah, let's watch it. Oh, we don't have sound. Thank you for all who participated in the video. I want to introduce you, but just a little bit, because we only have 1.5 hours for this whole conversation, and we are quite a few of us. So the way we're gonna do it is doing a bit of statistics. So show me your hand if you work for one of the organizations that are participating in the project. Yay, welcome. Now raise your hand if you are someone who is invited by one of the organizations. Awesome. So now I'm going to tell you the names of the countries that are present on this call. And what I want to ask you is that if I say your country, unmute yourself and say hi in your own language. So who do we have from Bulgaria?
Zdrasti.
And Czech Republic?
Dobré dopoledne.
Germany?
Hi, that's me. Guten Morgen allerseits.
Hungary?
Jó napot kívánok, sziasztok!
We got Latvia?
Labdien.
And Lithuania?
Labas, labas.
Labas.
Romania?
Bună ziua tuturor.
And Slovakia?
Ahojte, dobré ráno.
So beautiful diversity we created so quickly. So we are here to discuss those questions that we've seen in the video and to start brainstorming about what if it's all a game, and what if we are the ones who are creating the rules? What if we can just take a turn towards a more sustainable planet on this very special World Environmental Day in 2020? So we are going to divide into 2 sections. So in the first 30 minutes, we're gonna have Ákos and Adriana and Justas, Pauline and Petko. And then in the second half, we're gonna talk to Chris, Jurgis, Chibi, and Victory. You're Magor. I'm so sorry. I used your family name the whole time. So Magor from Romania and Victory in the second session. And then in the end, at 11:15, we'll come back together to answer the audience questions. So if you are watching us on Facebook, which if I'm right, there are already 76 people watching us on Facebook. So hi there on Facebook. If you got any questions, down the comment section, you can put them, and I make sure that they will be asked right in time. So let's jump into the sections. The only thing I try to do is to, yeah, maybe it's better this way, the screen. Okay, so good that you are here. And I want to ask you, how did you feel watching this video, seeing those questions?
Well, can I start something?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the first remark is, yes, it's really difficult to answer some of them. Even I feel I know some answers, but when you need to raise a hand very quickly, it's when you thought it's car or plastic, it's or whatever. So it's really interesting. But actually, both of the suggestions are not so sustainable. So it's really interesting to pick one which is more sustainable, because of the 2 bad things. It's quite difficult sometimes, especially for me, it was.
Yeah, I can add to that perhaps. I mean, we didn't know the solutions and we were not supposed to look them up beforehand. So it's really interesting to decide spontaneously what we personally think would be better from an environmental perspective. And I, for example, there was one question about whether to use plastic bags or paper bags, what is more sustainable. And I was like, plastic, of course not. And I voted for paper bag, obviously. And in fact, it turns out that paper bags are less carbon print heavier than plastic bags, in fact. But as you just said, just as I think me personally, I prefer using fabric bags, and we didn't know, what kind of plastic bag, whether it's lightweight or heavyweight, and so yeah, it was really interesting.
I could add about the bags because I was thinking of this choice, and because of course making certain choices is very complicated, because when you are thinking of sustainable behavior, we need to take into account many different factors. And for example, this choice of plastic or paper bag, well, now we know that the production of a plastic bag has a lower carbon footprint than the production of a paper bag. However, if we think in the context of waste, where these bags will end up sooner or later, the choice is maybe not so certain anymore, because we know that a plastic bag will decompose much longer than a paper bag. So this choice is not so certain. But if this bag is recycled, then again, not dumped in a landfill, then again, the choice is not so clear. So there are so many aspects to take into account that it's actually very difficult to say which choice is like more sustainable or which choice is more climate friendly if we talk in the context of this Game On project.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also after having watched the video now, I don't think that the main message of it was to look at who's got the right answer and who didn't. You saw that all the responses differed all the time. And I would say that all of us are supporters are fighting against the climate crisis, and yet we didn't know all the answers. And I think that's maybe also my key takeaway of this, that maybe we as individuals are not always equipped with the right answers, but that's what we have scientists for. And maybe to me, sometimes at some point, it's also that it's really easy for decision makers to kind of shift the responsibility to the individual, all this narrative of if only you ate less meat and use your bike a bit more often, then the whole crisis could be solved. And that's just simply not the case. And I think it's a bit unfair to see how sometimes our decision makers shift their responsibilities that are, and hard decisions, inconvenient decisions really, and shift them towards the individual and transfer them to us, because at some point there's some hard decisions that are just won't suffice for individual decisions, and we need big solutions at some point. So I think sometimes that's also a bit unfair to always say this, and especially now where we always say that we are in this world where we're talking about now the world after the pandemic, as if we just sit there and just wait for the world after the pandemic to start. But it's being designed right now, and we can all take part in that. So I think it's a bit ridiculous to always talk about the world after the pandemic. Yeah, just because it is being designed right now, and we're not supposed to just sit there and wait.
Yeah, I completely agree. And for me, also this video, on the one hand, it really brought into perspective that when you combine all these individual decisions together, you can make an impact. But on the other hand, I started thinking about how I think quite often we can fall into this mental trap of thinking that, oh, if I stop using straws, or if I just use the eco bag or something or whatever, yeah, that I've done my part and it's all fine. And I think often the kind of conversation and the whole focus is tilted towards these, yeah, let's say the straws that are the culprit of all the environmental damage that is happening, and it kind of shifts the attention from the big questions. It's like how will we as a society
keep on producing energy, for instance, you know, because that is the main question, you know. So it's the both things. Like, we as individuals need to start thinking about our impact, but also as a society, and demand that from the decision makers, because sometimes I get a little annoyed when I see in the media, you know, when people are just discussing, or on social media just discussing the plastic straws or something, and then my friends stop using them and they think, yeah, and now I'm eco, and that's it. Yeah, and then but then they book the third holiday in, you know, somewhere abroad, and they fly by plane like 5 times a year because it's cheap. So so yeah.
And that's also what's happening in the stores, right? I mean, just, you know, by abandoning plastic bags, the whole problem of food production and fair trade, etc., won't be solved. It's what we perhaps would call symbolic politics. You know, there's so much more to it.
But don't you think
we have to be careful?
Don't you think that the demand from people puts a push on the government's shoulders, so that they have to change policies based on popular demand?
But the question is, what kind of policies? First, we have to, and how? First, we have to face the truth. And because even now, we do not face the facts and processes, what is happening now. We have environmental policies for decades now, hundreds, thousands of environmental policies throughout the globe. But despite these increasing advanced environmental policies, the burden on the environment has steadily increased. And no, not the population. Population growth is not the primary cause of this, but the overconsumption in the developed countries. According to the Oxfam study, the richest 10% of our planet is responsible half of the fossil fuel gas emissions. And while the poorer half of the Earth, more than now 3.5 billion people, is just responsible for the 10% of the emissions. Even in the last 20 years, the population of Africa doubled. The ecological footprint of Africa is almost stayed the same. And there is both a big promise of environmental policies that we can decouple economic growth from environmental burden. That was the promise. They promised us that we can grow, even green grow, and we can decouple it from the environmental burden. But it did not work. It doesn't work. You can have specific examples from decoupling the environmental burden and the economic growth, but those are very specific small areas. And we should not forget that we are not just talking about environmental problems. There are social problems and also economic problems, and we have to link those ones. We have development policies, and even we have a lot of more development policies, putting a lot more money into development in the developing countries. Meantime, inequalities have reached a very high level across the continents, across the countries, and also within countries. Inequalities growth. And even when we have small results in poverty reduction, we have often playing just with the static.
Oh, I think we lost him.
Yeah.
Maybe it was too much serious. Yeah, just okay. What I like, of course, the possibility to put this as a game or put this in more cultural and social thing is really important, because I think it's really nice to have this different perspectives. And what can we learn for this sustainability thing? I think it's more easier to adapt to different conditions in the future as well. So our decisions for ourselves is not making a huge effort on the Earth scale, but what we learn today we can really use in the future Earth conditions, because it will be different. I'm sure it's really we need to think about what we are. The place to game on is good to start, but the climate is taking a little bit of a challenge of all this, of the rules now, and we need to also play as a Earth shows us to play. So I think that this gamification is one of the ways. I think as a culture, I really like the starting of our meeting with a song, which is really good to have it. And yeah, that's I like it in the video as well. So it's some message is really interesting. What lies beneath, we still need to unwrap it.
Yeah, I think what the video beautifully showed is that it's not about blaming and shaming each other and, you know, all this, you know, you did this wrong, but that right, because there's, I mean, all of us, I don't know, I'm a vegetarian, but I might do something else that is harming the environment. And I think just having or acknowledging that there needs to be commitment in the first step to do something about it. And this doesn't only mean reducing the meat in your diet or using less plastics, but to me, it also means learning how to organize initiatives and protests and petitions and writing to your decision makers and things like that. And I think that's, yeah, something we all could do and just recognize that we could do it and stop blaming each other for individual decisions.
And another approach that comes to me super nice is the love for nature. Like so many of us living in cities are losing that connection to nature. And I think just getting more connected brings us a new perspective, which encourages us to protect it, right? Because basically what we all want is to still have trees to give us shade and to still have air to breathe. How the love for nature is connected to sustainability, in your opinion?
I think it's a kind of two-way thing, that what happens when people remove themselves from nature too much and don't have a direct experience and direct contact. The first thing is that you can't admire something that you don't know, and then you can't have a motivation to kind of protect what you don't know. But on the other hand, what I see in my work is that people in the city who don't go out much, don't spend too much time in nature, or don't spend prolonged periods of time in nature and repetitively maybe in the same area, they still think that climate change is somewhere really far away, especially like people in Slovakia often. If they just commute to the office in their car and then spend their whole day in the office with the air conditioning on, and then maybe over the weekends they just have a barbecue in their garden, they don't see that climate change is already happening here. But because from the title of my work, I spend a lot of time in the field, and I can see, and my colleagues, we can see already the effects of climate change on the ecosystems in Slovakia, that the forests are drying out, that is really, it's becoming really difficult to restore some of the parts of the forests because the seedlings just don't make it throughout the summer. That would not happen 15 years ago, because there was still moisture and water in the ground, but now it's not. People in the south, the farmers, they're really struggling, and we work with them as well. So I always tell people who are a bit skeptical about climate change and whether it's such a big deal, and maybe we're just making it a bigger deal than it is. I always say, well, go to the south of Slovakia and go talk to the farmers there. And nobody is a climate change denier there, because they really struggle now. They really struggle to make the yields every year and to cope with the droughts and with the extremes of the weather. So it's already happening here, not just somewhere far away in Australia or in the Arctic. So people should spend more time outside and should go out and should really see it with their own eyes, I think.
Adriana, totally. Sorry.
Go.
Yeah.
Go, please.
Okay, I totally agree with you, because we understand that it's the nature of people to to believe to the processes what they actually see with their eyes, and it's the situation here in Latvia that people don't believe to climate change because it's difficult to see these changes just here. And we know that glaciers are melting, but if we don't see these processes here, then it seems like somewhere far away and it's not connected to us. But I also think it's the fact what you, Adrian, mentioned about being in a city and don't going into nature, that this also affects this feeling that everything is fine and no climate change is going on. And another thing, I think that just going out and just seeing trees, it doesn't help. You have to connect the processes in the nature to the climate change or to be able to connect to understand these processes. So it's also the work of explanation here, very important.
Yeah, I also like to confirm and to mostly agree with what has been said. And it's on one hand, it's a real challenge. On one hand, you have the people who love nature more easily to explain about the climate change challenges and the impact on the nature. But on the other hand, many of those would like to take the picture, the picture, and to take it as their own, their house. And again, the connection somehow breaks with the feeling. And the real challenge is how to live with the nature and how you live sustainably and to interconnect. And it's easy to say don't eat meat, but at the same time, the nature really depends on sustainable grazing and all local breeds and things like that, and really to find and to recognize all these interlinks. It's also our role to really to explain, to talk to people and to develop their knowledge and awareness about all of this. And I want to make a reference to the previous question concerning the what is the right answer. I think the more important is to have informative, diverse opportunities of choices. If you don't have choices, you use what you have. If you don't have information, you use anything which comes first or is cheaper, or yeah. And that's why we need to have this various products which give you enough information how it's produced and how it really contribute to the solutions and to sustainability. And yeah, that's briefly what I can say.
Yes, with regard to the virus, it's a really sad matter. But I think on the positive side of it, that at least a dialogue has begun, at least in Hungary, and as I see also globally and in Europe, a debate whether to continue where we left off or try to take this as an opportunity to move on in a positive, more positive direction. And it must be seen that the virus is not an exclusive only health issue, but this is part of a larger problem, such as it's closely linked with the decline of natural areas, globalization, increased resource use, that we are taking more and more away from the nature. And this is not what we only say, but many well-known scientific organizations. And even before the COVID virus, nearly even 1 million deaths per year were linked to animal to human viruses. And I think the virus pointed out several other things, such as the fact that we are what we are outlining are the visions, the predictions, the opportunities, the dangers, the threats for the globe or for the people. Those are real and need to be cared of, and those really could happen even in materials about sustainable development in the 90s, even in the EU sustainable strategy. It was repeatedly underlined that globalization, the resource use, was multiplying the dangers of viruses. And then it somehow left out even from these materials, but we can see now that in the end it became reality. And so we really have to look out for those predictions, even if those are negative. And I think it's not about if we believe in climate change or not now. Yes, most of us believe in it and see it as a problem, but the threat is not so immediate as the virus. And what we could see that we are capable of big changes if it's needed. It's just unfortunate that if we done that only when the threat was just not at our doorstep, but in the house. So I hope we are not waiting when climate change will be really in the house. And we should learn from that and start acting.
This, what you just talked about, reminds me of something that my really good friend says, who's an environmentalist, and she always kind of compares society to a tree, that we should behave more like trees, because they also don't grow infinitely. They grow and then they reach a certain size, and that's where they have their balance, and they don't continue growing infinitely. So this is some sort of challenge for society. I think that we shouldn't take it as granted that we just grow and take more. And also as individuals, I think really that we started, at least my generation and maybe the generation before me, we started to feel really entitled, at least in the West, entitled to so many things that we think belong to us or we should have. And this is a criticism also on myself, you know, that maybe not everyone in the world should travel the whole world, you know, and maybe we don't need the 5 cars in the garage and the big house, you know. So it's really, I think we need as individuals to really go inside and really have a think about it, because we're probably maybe even from childhood taught that we are entitled to all these things, and then we grow up thinking that we really are, you know, and we just continue the path.
Can I?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Concerning the issue of the virus, it's not the worst threat. Simply, the pandemic really uncovered the stronger threat. This is the readiness of the bad guys to ruin the achievements in the policy, achievements in the laws. We have already a number of cases, like in Greece or in Slovenia, like the plans in Bulgaria to change the laws, and the public somehow frozen in the freedom of reaction to resist the bad guys doing their things in favor of destruction of nature, of the policies of sustainability in general. That we need to really to get more power and knowledge and readiness of the communities and societies to resist these processes. Thank you.
If I can add to that, I'm not sure if I can echo that for at least for Germany, because what I am seeing right now, and I'm not sure what the situation is like in other contexts, but in my understanding and what I can see right now is that since we have this tremendous momentum, I feel like there's so many communities waking up and organizing themselves, despite the fact that it's really difficult for us right now to protest, to go on the streets with all the restrictions that we have in place. And despite that, we still have people going to the streets, you know, being in distance and wearing masks and everything, and still protesting and demanding. And there's so many petitions going on right now that we have signed. And our government, in fact, just adopted the financial aid package yesterday or 2 days ago, and it's not that bad. I mean, we don't have the buyer's premium for cars, for diesel cars, but only for electric cars, which is a step. And I think, and there's so many movements, especially from youth and Fridays for Future and all these different organizations who are stepping up right now and saying, you know, you need to fight every crisis, and the climate crisis may not be that visible for some, especially as we just said, especially for people living in cities and just being a bit, you know, in their little bubble and being able to close their eyes. But yeah, I think we do have this momentum right now, and I think we're at the crossroads right now, and I think we can really use this opportunity at this moment to bring about some sustainable change. Although I still do have to say that, I mean, I think the daily global emissions, CO2 emissions, fell by, I think, 17% or something as of April 2020. But it is a bit difficult because I think we had the same situation or a similar situation in 2008 after the world financial crisis, the Great Recession, where emissions also went down, and we were like, hey, that's good. But I feel like we haven't quite learned from that. And afterwards, the economy just went back up again. And I'm, a bit pessimistic when it comes to that. I think that this might be just a similar situation going on now if we don't make the right decisions, the big term, huge decisions that need to be made right now to bring about systemic change.
There is one thing which makes me very reserved when thinking about this crisis, and it's the previous crisis of 2008, when there was a big economic crisis in Europe, and I checked statistics in Latvia which show that awareness of climate change fell sharply during this 2008 economic crisis, because many other issues were much more important, and it was also a long time after crisis. And this data of climate change awareness, they rose very, very slowly after this crisis, and have not yet reached the level they were before this 2008. And that's why I would be very cautious in assessing the, potential benefits of this COVID crisis and the context of environmental and climate change issues, because economic situation is now much more important to a big part of society, and also to politicians, and the environmental issues, they just step somewhere, they are thrown somewhere back.
But on the other hand, we see a lot of news about the Himalaya becoming visible from Nepal, about the air of San Francisco cleaning up, about dolphins in Venice, which is fake news.
But it's a short time, it's just 2 months.
Yeah, that's true. But what we see is that the train has stopped. We always said that it's impossible not to commute. It's impossible not to fly. The train is impossible to stop. That's what everybody was echoing in the past years. Now, clearly, the train has stopped. We are in a point where we might have a chance to go to a different direction. And what I wanted to ask you from your perspective, as a society, what do you think we should giving up so we can save the things that really matter? Like, what are those things that we could give up now, even from experience that we gained in the past few months? What are unnecessary?
Yes, it stopped, but the question is how. A lot of people lost their jobs. And even in Europe, in the developed countries, there are a lot of poor people who needs help. So this stop is not an ideal stop. Maybe from environmental point of view, yes, but there are other point of views like social. And when we are talking about systematic change, I also use this phrase very often. We also have to clarify what do we mean on it. And still, I was talking about environmental policies, and still those policies, unfortunately, are targeting end-of-pipe solutions. Like, let's talk about greenhouse gas emission. That's the end of the pipe to limit greenhouse gas emission. The question is, yes, are we ready to start thinking at the start? Then that is resource use, and that is about consumption. Are we ready to think about lower our consumption and to say, yes, it's in every field. It's not just about traveling or buying, but it's also about electricity and everything. And that is, if we have to think about it, it's not an environmental or a social or economic issue. It's a moral issue. And the solution is only there if we can change our moral, where we find our happiness, in traveling or in buying and consumption or somewhere else. So I think we have to go very deep if we want to find the real solution.
I was reading today some statistics or information that I haven't heard before, and that was that if we want to meet the Paris Agreement, we would need to lower emissions by almost 8% every year for the next 10 years. So this is the global average that we will have lowered due to coronavirus this year. So this means that we would need the coronavirus to continue for another 10 years if we want to meet that target.
That's insane.
This is really eye-opening, or was to me, this information.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is that society can adapt. At what cost is another question. But each of us have had to change their habits during the past 2 or 3 months. And I think we can, each of us, take something away from it. And for instance, in Slovakia, the biggest drop in emissions was due to transport, like personal transport, you know. So, and I started walking to work and cycling to work. Before I used the public transport, but now I cycle or I walk. So I'm definitely going to keep this habit for after the pandemic as well. And yeah, so answering your question, Kitty, like what can we do? I think as individuals, we should think about like what is our personal biggest environmental impact, and I think most people will find that it will be traveling, and it will be consumption, but traveling will be one of the really big things. So I think the pandemic has shown that we can work from home more and we can commute greener to work. You know, we shouldn't be lazy.
Yeah.
We have 2 minutes for the second round, actually 1, until we switch to the next bunch. And I see that Petko has a sentence to say, and also Pauline. So quickly go ahead, and then we switch off your screens and see you back at 11:15 in the big circle. So what's your closing sentence, Petko?
Yeah, it's difficult to say, but I would refer to my previous thought about the choices. We have to support and to incorporate in the policies right choices if the people want to join, to choose to use how to travel, or let's work more from distance, not really have to travel. We have a lot of more opportunities at hand, and even in the environmental movement we have to rethink a lot of choices and opportunities. And the good thing with the virus is that we have a confirmation that we are right, but at what price? This is something to be widely discussed and various people, and openly yeah, with a clear mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining the discussion. Pauline, do you have a sentence?
Yeah, maybe just to reflect also what Adriana said. To me, it's three things. First of all, I think we can cancel domestic flights completely. That's just insane. We don't need it. We have the train service running. Second, because I think air travel only accounts for about 2-point-something% of global carbon emissions, I think what we need to focus on is cars. And for that instance, I think what we can do is we need car-free inner cities and more investment into bike roads, essentially. And the third part is maybe because we all experience this kind of forced digitalization now, me at university, but also all the other institutions. And I think we can really, what we might take from this is just to really look at what long-term travel for conferences and meetings we really need and what can be done online. Digital university is quite intense and also somewhat annoying, but there's other instances where you need long-term travel, long-distance travel, which I think could be replaced by online meetings.
All right, thank you so much for being with us in the first part, and we jump to the second part now. So Dorothy is going to switch your cameras off and the others on, and see you back here in 30 minutes. Hey, we got Victory and Magor. I'm sorry, right? Now I'm saying right.
Yes,
okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Chris, welcome.
Hey.
As a first, very personal question is, did you change any of your personal habits during this lockdown that we had to a more sustainable one? And are you going to keep on with that?
I think I changed the habits because first of all, we stayed home for more than 3 months. So it's just impossible to change your personal habits, and it's just impossible to change your life. But I would like to draw the attention that most of the news about nature regenerating were fake news. National Geographic had a big article on that the dolphins are fake news, and a lot of fake news is there. And something, I think this is one of the biggest danger, to think that we can actually have results connected to environment without actually doing any massive change in our lifestyle, in our way how we are handling our own lives. So I do think that the whole idea that when we watch at the video that we realized together, the whole idea how hard it is to choose between different options highlights that this is not an easy thing, and it needs continuous information. But again, going back to the question, I do think that we managed to change a lot of ways not to pollute, which was not really our choice. But on the other hand, I do think that a lot of products entered our life which was not there before. We are using now masks, we are using now gloves, we are using a lot of not reusable and not sustainable items, which was not there in our lives until now. If you go to the supermarket, the packaging was not reduced, it actually grew in this period. So I do think that it will be very important. Until now, we didn't have a choice, but from now on, it is very important how much do we put emphasis on risk evasion, and how much is the emphasis on nature. And I do think that we need, and I have seen a very good communication from many big companies who said that when the EU and the other international institutions are deciding how the package for economic health will look like, they need to take consideration sustainability on the long term. And I do think that this is the whole idea. When we are reconstructing the old normality, we need to take into consideration that many things of the old normality was not right in the first place. So we should somehow get rid of the ballast of the things that we didn't need it, and we should somehow cultivate new habits in our lives.
Yeah, what Magor said, and I really think that we need to look forward and how we take the possibility of changing the world, because honestly, I was not happy to see that all the small steps we have taken in the past few years were thrown away, and we did a massive leap back in the past 3 months when it comes to environment protection. The Czech Ministry of Environment suggested to stop separating the litter. So something that you would believe is not possible in the 21st century. So we need now to rechange our setups and focus most possibly on what we can do in the future, how we can motivate the people in a new and more entertaining way, so they will definitely change their habits no matter what comes around, no matter how much packaging they see in the supermarkets, no matter how they are forced to use one-time equipment like gloves, like masks. They need to think what they are doing, and they need to take their personal decisions by knowing why they are doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest difference for me during this pandemic was, and I can speak for what I see in Bulgaria, in my country. I see that more and more people are more open to support the local businesses, the local shops, locally grown food, which is, you know, it's something new. It's like a trend, which I like. And more people, they start to garden, they use their balconies, their backyards, you know, they boast with their production and stuff like that, which, you know, it's a little thing, but it switch your perspective to nature, back to roots, back to gardening, back to growing up your own food and stuff like that, and choosing, you know, to buy tomatoes that have been grown like around your city, instead tomatoes that have flew from the other side of Europe. So yeah, I think it's a positive change.
Yeah, I would think that the main thing to gain from this is not a shift in minor behaviors, but rather one of the things we're observing is like a momentary shift in consciousness, right? Where everybody in the world was living through something similar, and they understood that there's a lot of incoherent things going on. And a lot of them have to do with economics and kind of like the paradigm we live in. And so that moment where people are actually asking questions and saying, wait, something is not right here, you know, or where you hear people don't want to go back to the new normal. In my opinion, that is so much more important. And amongst my friends, which are activists, and even my friends which are not activists, there's this kind of openness to say, hey, okay, we need to actually step in and suggest something, because people who've usually been bitching about the environment and, you know, about sustainability and all of this for so long are marginalized. And we have assumed that role as marginal voices within a bigger paradigm. But the moment when people say, the people up top, or the people who are the incumbents or the main guys in charge, or the people who are mainstream, go, wait, we actually see that this is not working. And that's the moment when we need to step in. And again, our new narrative has to come not from an outsider speaking in, not from the adolescent complaining about the habits of their parents, but as somebody who's actually offering sustainable long-term visions of what we should be aspiring for. And so I don't know if we've missed the opportunity. For me, I have that kind of like a bit of a feeling, but I did really feel that during the whole COVID crisis, people were listening. People were actually looking for somebody to make sense. And I think in a greener way, in a way that says, wait, how do we solve supply chain issues? How do we solve sustainability also in terms of quality of life in conjunction with economic development and all this? I'd like to see us still step up to this challenge.
What we've seen is that we are capable to adapt. So from your perspective in relation to climate change, what does adaptation means to your community?
You know, when we talk about adaptation, I remember the first time when I actually met in a hard way the issue of climate change. I was a politician long time ago, and we had an international gathering when one MP from Africa, Central Africa, came and said, "You in Europe, you are causing most of the pollution, and you are talking about adaptation. And while you are talking about adaptation, I just lost half of my voters in a village, and I didn't lost the voters because they are not voting with me. I lost because they lost their crop field and they have nothing to eat. So I have a crisis. My voters are dying, and you are talking about adaptation." So I do think that we need to put everything somehow in context. When I heard this for the first time, I said, okay, this is an issue, cannot be ignored. And this is an issue, we cannot put enough emphasis on it. And I do think that adaptation should be a later solution. If we really cannot solve the issue, if we cannot address the issue, then we can talk about adaptation. But for us, it's relatively easy to talk about adaptation because we live in a climate which is still not very affected. We live in an area which we have significantly good economic situation, even an economic growth in our part of Europe. So it's easy for us to talk about adaptation. But if we are not considering the larger picture, if we are not considering if we will have the issues continuing regarding water safety, regarding pollution, regarding starvation and other things in Asia, especially in the Pakistan-India region, in the sub-Saharan Africa, we will have migration waves, which will not, when you look at it, it will not be connected to climate change, but we will not be prepared to deal with it. And the whole idea is not about adaptation. How do we make sure that the big impact is not going to happen? And right now we have a significant reduction in pollution. It's still not enough, but at least we see that it's possible. So there was no huge problem because we stopped for a few months. Now we can consider, do we need that much pollution? Do we need that much consumption? Do we need to continue exactly as we were doing in a way? Because if you look, Lancet, one of the biggest psychological journals, published that 25% of the population of Belgium, for instance, which we consider like a model country, is totally unhappy and has a level of very critical stress that they cannot deal with them by themselves. So if we consider this is the kind of society we want to build in, I do think that we have better choices, but the whole idea is to talk continuously about this. How can it look to present a better future to the people, or a better image of the future, not just criticize what is not going? Because one of the main problems with the environmental movement is that we are pointing out what is not working, but we are not creating a view how the world could look like, which is understandable and easy for everybody in order to adopt new behaviors.
Yeah, and I think that this is how we have to think about it. Adaptation is something what mankind is great in. We have always adapted. Yeah. So I'm not afraid that we would not have enough people creating adaptation scenarios. Where I see our role is that we need to focus on prevention and mitigation, because this is where not majority of people are heading to, because that causes more effort. It causes more of personal inputs, what we need to change in our everyday lives. And I really think that our role as NGOs should not be in adaptation. We have economists, we have got governments that are doing it anyway. So we should focus on prevention. And I understand that all these three parts are essential to work on the solution of climate crisis. But we need to focus more on preventions.
And so what I wanted to point out is that you really rightly said, Magor, is that when we speak of climate change, often we get into like a negative emotional cycle, and it makes people uncomfortable, and they more likely to neglect the topic as a whole. So what do you think, what's the biggest barrier that people have to dissolve to be able to talk about climate change?
I do think if you look at it psychologically, we deny because we cannot handle the threat. The whole idea, if now we are focusing as people, as citizens, as organizations, in order to enforce the positive behaviors that appeared in this period, then we are able to change something in the future. The whole idea is that we are too much focused on criticizing, too much focused on pointing out what is not working. And if we would be focusing on encouraging people, you started to do this and this during this crisis, please continue. It was a very, very good point. And if we do that, we will see some real behavioral changes. And in the long term, I do think that the culture of our society can be changed. But this also depends to the leadership models that we are proposing, the leadership models that we are electing. So it's a bigger picture, but it all starts with encouraging positive behaviors.
I think Magor is completely spot on, man. Like, for sure, because you need also positive visions, something for people to be inspired about. I can say that one of the shifts I've had in the past year, even previous to COVID, and maybe speaking to a lot of radical communities like the Burning Man community, and really being active there, is that there's a concept which is surfacing, which is building arcs. So rather than, again, bitching about a paradigm and saying this is bad, that's bad, we need to change this and this and that, is actually envisioning arcs, systems, self-sufficient systems, which are sustainable within themselves and are coherent to the people which are inside them and perpetuate them. And the beautiful thing is that then people see, they see a model that works and they go, I'm cool with this, I like this. I can envision a post-paradigm which looks something like this. So kind of like building micro utopias and really applying them on a very grassroots level where people can reap both the benefit of being part of it and experiencing, but also feeling that they're not impotent when you look at the whole scenario and saying, how do we change the whole thing? Because the truth of the matter is that if you just engage the paradigm with everything that's bad with it, it leads to impotence, it leads to a sense of unfulfillment, it leads to a sense of pointlessness. And that's why I think that actually really just trying to see something beyond it, like something we can create a community which is something to replicate and to scale and to imitate is a good way to go.
Yeah, what I think is that usually in every case, and especially in this sensitive topic, storytelling is like a tool that we can use. For example, climate change, it's such a huge problem, such a huge scale. But for example, the story that you told us, Magor, just a few minutes before, it gives new perspective. So what I think we need is more stories, because through human stories, we can really see the scale of the changing of the lives of people around the world. And there's actually a great movie. It's called 2040, which I really recommend. It's a documentary if you haven't watched it, which it's about a father who explains to his little daughter like what the world is going to look like in 20 years. And what he does is that he gives himself no restrictions. So like he takes the best theories that we can live in the next 20 years and he makes them alive. Like he takes the best, for example, the ideal car models, and he shows what the world will look like after 20 years if we start now, producing these car models. So it's really an inspiring film that if we use, our imagination and storytelling and just, think for and encourage, as you say, for this sensitive topic of climate change, I think we can start to have like a more open in receiving people for this topic. So I think storytelling and imagination is something that we can try to work on.
We got a really nice comment on Facebook from Resistant. They say instead of asking the question, what can we give up? We could ask the question, what do we gain by living more sustainable? And there is also an example. So instead of saying we should give up driving car in the city center, we could say we should gain more public spaces for people, for music, for restaurants, for trees, and for parks. So the flip side of the coin can be part of the discussion as well. And I really like this.
And also building on what Chris said, I feel that we enter the game when we want to impress people with numbers. How many football fields of forests are disappearing? We have an isle the size of Texas or France floating on the Indian Ocean and so on. But the problem is that we cannot visualize that big data. I led WWF Romania for 7 years and WWF Korea for 1 year. And when I was in Korea, I heard a lot about plastic pollution. And I was, oh yeah, it's terrible. And I've seen the videos. We went to do a necropsy on sea turtles because we had one of the biggest experts. And we were opening the dead turtles, and one after another, they were filled with plastic. And when you see actually with your own eyes that 70% of this planet is plastic, we actually occupy 20–25% of this planet. And we are able to pollute so hardly the oceans that 70% of the turtles I have seen with my own eyes were blocked because of plastic inside their digestive system. I was just standing there and I said, I cannot believe this. Actually, I cannot believe this. I don't want to touch plastic ever again, which is not possible in our lives. But again, if we come with smaller stories and more powerful and more personal and not with the big numbers, how many hectares of I don't know what, or how many liters or how many trillions of plastic particles are in the ocean. No, we actually need to see what is the real impact. And also we need to see what is the impact of the people who are doing the positive change. Because there are a lot of people around us who are influencing their communities and making huge changes. And I'm not talking just about the environment. I'm talking about social changes. I'm talking about inequalities. I'm talking about people who are, when you look at them, it seems that they are alone, but they are making huge difference. They are making a really good effort. And I do think building communities around those individuals, building communities between us, is the solution in order to change the culture on the long term.
I would like to comment on that, because our experience from our audience is that they like the positive examples and what they can do, because once we are showing them too much of the big picture, they feel that their small change will not do anything. And then the decision is, I won't do anything. And this is a wrong setup. So we need to set in the minds of the people that every small change counts, because, and I know it from my personal experience, that start with a small change and then you add another one and then you add another one, and suddenly in a year you are living a nice sustainable life, and you go by example and you bring another whole community doing the same, and that finally makes the difference. So yeah, maybe one person would not make so much difference, but if you inspire others, that's what's important, and that's what our audience is saying to us. The way you are saying it, the way that you are positive and you are not threatening but leading by example, is what motivates us.
Chris, jumping on your movie idea of 2040, I actually, like, you are reading my questions, because the last question that I wanted to ask you guys is that, so imagine that we are in 2040. There are a lot of radical changes that went through the world. Some of them happened because of climate change. And if you get a chance from there to give an advice to your present self in 2020, what would that one advice be?
So if I can start, I focused on a lot of the small things, and now I can see that I can do even bigger changes. And there was one topic that I slightly overseen for the past 2 years. And I would advise my younger me to be more cautious about the energy that we are using, because there is where most of the pollution we are creating lies. And I would start fighting against the coal power plants much earlier than I did.
Thank you.
I do think if we want to engage in the topic of environment, we need to acknowledge that it's not just about the environment, it's about people. It's not about that we should convince everybody on this planet to care about the environment. We should convince everybody on this planet to care about others. Because if you start to care about people around you, if you start to care about your community, if you start to care about your country or your continent, then you, by default, you will care about the environment. If you are thinking about more than yourself, you are already an environmentalist, even if you are not talking about forests, oceans, plastic, or any other topic. So I do think that what we need to talk about is care more, communities, and also let yourself to be seen as vulnerable. We are not perfect, and we can support each other. This is why we are on this planet right now. And I do think that together we can achieve a lot of great things.
I would agree. I would agree with Magor that one of the most important things is elevating consciousness and getting people to actually be more emotionally vested, not only in the environment, but especially other people, and creating that sense of togetherness. And that's, again, you know, COVID reality has shown us that you can have a whole planet living through the same thing. And so having that connection is extremely important, and creating that togetherness. But I would also add that if I was telling myself something from 2040 to 2020, I would tell myself to invest in small scale, but scalable, resilient solutions, you know. Think about creating small prototypes, things that could work and inspire others, rather than trying to go the whole lobbyist path and say, for example, let's change energy by finding a solution to coal, but rather say, hey, how can I provide energy for my own home and my own community or small group of people, and inspire others to take reins of that change. So I would combine the two, you know, more empathy, more love, more caring, but really with feasible, scalable grassroots solutions.
Well, something I would probably say to myself is to not stop leading by example, because it's Victory said, I think this is the most powerful way that you can just, you know, practice what you preach. You know, don't just preach to, you know, faces of the people, but, you know, having to live, you know, in a sustainable way, even without, you know, telling your friends about it. They can see it, and they can, you know, start asking questions, and then you can have a conversation. But that conversation is not started with, you know, we are dying, let's make a change, but hey, I think this is the better way. So yeah, I think that every person, every decision matters, and it can lead up to, you know, impact that we are not capable of seeing, because, you know, we are living our lives, but we don't know what we impact and how we impact the people around us. But just having that in mindset.
And the others are arriving slowly, because I think they also might have a great answer for this last question. So your 2040 self can send a message to your 2020 self. What's that advice that you would give?
Well, may I start from the newcomers or just comebackers? Yeah, I think, yeah, for me it's a message still to live as I'm living now, but I hope that the love, the mindset of the people could be a little bit different. It will be easier to talk about a lot of things. I think it's not climate crisis or climate change is the issue. It's the issue of human mindset, which is still not capable to have it all of things. We have a lot of bad things which should be connected, as Magor said, in more wider perspective. And I still believe that the love, the holiness, it will be the right thing in the future. So I see it as a bright 2040, not as a dark one. So, well.
Thank you.
Let me start with a concrete proposal. Take action now. For Earth Day, Friends of the Earth Hungary just published more than 100 pages set of proposals for green economic recovery. with the main aim to decrease our resource use and to find real cause of the problems and solve them. And that is also why we started a petition called Live Affirming Society and Economy, and which is a little bit more complex than a usual petition. It's not just demands from someone else, but also pledges from myself. And what would I do differently as an individual or as a family or as part of the community? And what are I to that? I can have demands from the decision makers because we think that change should happen on every level. There are 4 areas of the petition: sustainable use of natural resources, localization instead of globalization, responsible corporations and transformation of finance system, and last but most importantly, renewal of thinking and our morals. And the petition was backed by more than 100 well-known people, Hungarian people at the beginning: bishops, mayors, activists, teachers, actresses, writers, and more than 6,000 people made the pledge and signed the petition till today. And you can find, hopefully soon, the link in the chat of Facebook Live. Please check and make your pledge. And concretely about your question, what is the proposal for later myself? I would bring a quote from a Hungarian engineer. And this is that in the world, the problem is not that we are doing something wrongly, but that we are doing wrong things. And if we finally would do good things, even badly, the result will be good, maybe smaller, but good. While if we want to do bad things better and better, the result will be bigger bad. And that is what we are doing now. Let's change that and start doing even small, but good things.
Thank you. Who else has already advice?
Do we still have enough time? So I can add?
Yes.
All right. So I think if I were to send myself a message, it would probably be to engage in difficult conversations, because what I've been doing in the past is whenever I would notice someone not believing in climate change or not sharing my opinion and my passion, essentially, I would avoid that conversation. And I think we need to have these difficult conversations with people who do not necessarily share opinion. And I even experienced that in the human rights community. I work a lot as a volunteer with Amnesty International. And we are trying to raise more awareness about the interlinkages between climate change and human rights violations as a consequence of climate change. And in the human rights community, there's a lot of people who maybe don't necessarily see this as a traditional human rights issue, because, you know, we're here to protect humans and human rights, and that's got nothing to do with the environment, which is just wrong on so many levels, because, you know, there's no need to protect human rights or uphold human rights on a dead planet, and when there's no future. So that's something we try to do. For example, we just actually just today we're finishing an education campaign where every week one of our activists would just take one specific human right and explain how this specific right is violated as a consequence of climate change, to just really make it visible and understandable for everyone. And I think that's my main takeaway also, that we need to see that all different groups from all spheres of society need to step up and see how their topics, be it human rights or anything else, are connected to the climate crisis. We need this response to be all of society.
Thank you. Petko?
Yeah, thank you. I would first like to say that don't be depressed. Yeah, we have a lot of problems. These bloody environmentalists are always talking about the problems, and often people, yeah, either ignore it or get depressed. Don't be depressed. There are solutions. Solutions are in our hand. If you want if you are capable, and simply choose most suitable scenario or more suitable life for you. At the same time, be pressful one, or press to put your press on the companies, put your press on the governments, because they all work for their private interest, or most of them. And if there is no, or if we don't unite, if we don't go and if we don't insist, nothing is happening. And they're doing or taking the wrong or private serving decision. And that's what would be my message. This is my message to myself. That's what I'm trying to do. And this is my message to our followers or people who wants to do something to solve the problems of the climate and to preserve biodiversity. I don't like to forget this last thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more message from future selves?
Maybe I would add, the message to myself would be, don't lose energy, don't lose motivation, and don't lose hope, and find your community, because together we're stronger, and that really helps. When you feel down, you have your support group, and together you overcome that. That's the sugar, and the whip is just something my climate change professor said once. She said when we felt really down together during one class, and maybe it's not very motivational for somebody, but for me it is. She says it can always be worse. It's gonna be probably bad, but it can always be worse. So we have to keep on doing something, and we have to fix what we can fix. So there is still time, so let's do it.
Awesome. Did we have everyone in this? Okay, if yes, I really want to thank you for bringing all your diverse perspective in here. And I fully agree with your last sentence, Adriana, that we really need community and we really need peer connection and peer learning, because this is the only way we can keep ourselves on the surface in this game that we play. In order to win. And one thing that I would like to show you as a little last piece of this call today is the project introduction video that we created. I hope it brings you a bit of mojo. And then we come back for a quick checkout circle all together. So if Dorka is ready to share her screen with the video, we go and watch it. Yes. No sound. Thank you. Okay, so I just want to emphasize the key messages, like the action points that we can take from here, and that's to raise awareness, to change our own habits, to create community, and to encourage others to do the same. I think that's what we all agreed that we are game on for. Now I would like to ask you to show your left hand. Oh no, the right. Bring your right hand. Now you can unmute yourself because I want your noise. It makes it more funny. So now find someone on your screen who you really felt aligned with. Find a hand that you want to give a high five to, and then turn your hand 19 degrees. Find your left hand and try to clap with that person at the same time. So try to give a high five to someone on the screen. Yeah, it's a bit of, it needs coordination because the one doesn't know that you're following them, right? Okay, so try to give a high five to someone.
Oh God.
Okay,
can I high five y'all?
Once more, try again.
I high five somebody's head.
Okay. Yeah. Good one. And we got a little music promised, I think. Yes, Jurgis, do we get
more music?
Yes.
Oh?
More music. Oh wow. Okay. All right. Let me sort you out.
Well, we only have 3 more minutes, so.
All right, it's good. I'm just gonna grab my guitar 1 second.
Thank you.
All right, here it is. All right. So one of the things I would suggest right here is to really get yourself involved. I have noticed that when we are online and with this whole new COVID reality, where a lot of socialization happens online, you need a lot of imagination, you need a lot of trust. So I can create some music online for you, but I need to trust that you're gonna get yourself involved and you're gonna participate. That's my daughter, right? Gonna make some music together. Yeah, gonna make some music together. And if I may ask you to show me your hands once more. Show me those hands, because it really helps the melody if you clap along, yeah. Can I hear you clapping? Yeah. Now you got a groove going, you are engaging and participating. You're actually enriching your experience through your own participation without me getting the feedback loop. Just trusting. Make some music together. Yeah, gonna make some music together. Can I ask for some noise from you? Whoa,
wow.
Oh, oh. This one. Oh, 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 hey. You try it. Some music together. Oh, hey. Gonna make some music together. One more time. Hey. Oh,
Yeah.
Hey. Some music together. Hey. Ooh. Ooh. All right. Brothers and sisters, come gather round. This simple act weaves people through sound. Long before, not so long ago, music was something you didn't do on your own. Cook it with emotion. Give me emotion. Treat it like it's sacred, like it's special. Cook it with emotion. Yeah, we gotta treat it like it's sacred. We're gonna treat it like it's sacred. Hey, oh, gonna make some music together. Yeah, oh, oh, gonna make some music together. Gonna make some music together. Music is a beautiful thing, and it's much more beautiful when you do it together, when people come into a common pulsation. And in a way, when you expose yourself to other human beings, you calibrate not only your physical self, your heartbeat, your demeanor, but also psychologically, emotionally, and intellectually. So I'm glad that we jazzed around with all these sustainable ideas today, and we made beautiful music together.
Hey! Woo!
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, everyone who was watching us on Facebook. I'm going to switch the record, the live off. So goodbye, people on Facebook.
Thank you.